to the fragility of this self-illusion.
But what Dr. B brought up a little while ago is, yes, our memories have a huge, huge part of ourself, but it affects our biology. It's not just this idea of a consciousness, it physically imprints on us in the form of our neurons and the network of our neurons with plasticity. So memories can't be the only thing affecting ourself, right? So our social life, that's going to affect us a lot, right? I think we can all agree that we are influenced by the people around us. We kind of conform. We talked about conformity in here. How many of you have ever heard someone use or have personally used this phrase after doing something that you regret, or maybe thinking something you regret? Ish. This is something that we'll hear a lot of politicians, big influential figures use when maybe they're caught in an act that doesn't necessarily go with their public image, right? But it's not just, these kind of obvious acts. There's, the juicy affairs and all of that jazz, but also things that we seek out personally that don't necessarily go with ourself. So one of these things is like a social online persona. If we, are very shy, very quiet in our real life, and that's what we contribute to ourselves, that's how we kind of identify what you would say if someone were to say, describe who you are. Oftentimes people will then go online and essentially create a whole new persona who is bubbly, maybe talks to many other people online. Another example is someone who tends to be in control a lot, maybe at work, in the family in general, may often go seek, for example, BDSM activity, because that's going to put them on the opposite end, not in control. So my question to you is, if we identify as a self, and we've created this self of who we are, why do we then go seek the total opposite? Get bored? Okay.
So the book presents us with this concept called ego depletion. And what ego depletion is where when you spend, say you go to a job interview and you are trying to put on your very best self, and so you feel like you're just constantly trying to frame all your actions, try to make yourself seem positive, try to look good, you experience what's called ego depletion, and it's shown to actually lower your glucose levels throughout that experience. And so then afterwards, you just kind of feel like, oh my gosh, that kind of took a toll on me. That's why maybe, sometimes after a long day at work, I might be like, I need to go get a drink, or, I need to go eat some sweet snack, something like that. Because we spend a lot of time trying to portray this outward positive self-image. And then with that idea of oh, that's just not like me, that's where cognitive dissonance comes into play. So that's where, maybe you do something and you're like, that wasn't a good thing I did. Then you think, well, why did I do that? That doesn't seem like me. Perhaps you come up with a myriad of other external influences that made you do that. So that way you don't feel like it weighs negatively on your self-image.
And we bring that and we'll say that to others because we don't want people to see us as that bad decision or something that isn't us, or we don't want them to see us depleted after what we've performed as what we think is our best self or our biggest self. If you look at the questionnaire, some of the questions say, I'm in control of my thoughts and actions. I like people to admire me, etc. We like to say, yes, that's us, or yes, I generally do well in school, or yes, I am generally a positive thinker, because we attribute these good things to ourselves, but in reality, that isn't the whole of who we are. We create that self around those positive ideals, yet we seek this other side of it constantly. So de-individuation. This is a little bit of acting outside ourselves, right? We talked about this, again, a little bit in class. The Stanley-Milgram experiment, that's the big shock experiment that we all know. People are doing these things that they're perceiving as evil or something they would never do, that's just not like me. I would never inflict harm on another person. But they did, because someone else was influencing them to. There's a similar experiment in the book where they set up the same thing, but kind of set up this situation where the participant overhears. He thinks he's not supposed to be hearing it, but they're intentionally doing this. He overhears the researchers say, you know, oh my gosh, this other student that's going to be shocked, like he's just an animal, he never does anything, basically, you know, trash to society, right? They end up giving more shocks, higher shocks up to higher voltage, just because of this small suggestion, right? Even though in reality, what we perceive as ourselves, we would never give such pain, I guess, or never put someone in danger, especially based on just who they are. The Stanford Prison Experiment, another example of going into violence and creating a whole new persona that isn't ourself. Mob mentality and suicide baiting. So this is something that was very big in a chapter of our book, and it's really intense and very shocking. It's basically a story about, there was someone trying to attempt to hurt themselves, and it stopped up traffic because it was in a public place in, the middle or side of the road. Eventually, one person, unfortunately, decided to just encourage that, get on with it so we can get on with our life. Eventually, it went on in a wave, and many, many other people started saying, just get on with it. Outwardly saying that to the person, not just thinking internally, right? You would never think of yourself as wanting to egg someone on to something like that. But we do. When the situation comes, we do, and that's the individuation. And this all goes, again, with the idea of, we need others' approval. We act based on what other people think and what other people act on and what other people see us as. So the opinions of others are shaping who we are into this self. But where does this desire come from?
In the book, there is a really good quote, and this relates to the idea of the looking glass self. It says, I am not what I think I am, and I am not what you think I am. I am what I think that you think I am. I know that's a mouthful, but it's basically saying that, we do care a lot about what other people think, and we do need other people's approval. And so we act to fit, the expectations we think they have of us. So you just get into, caught in this trap of, thinking, really.
And it's an innate sense. We do it instinctively. Babies, infants, we focus on the eyes and on faces, as we talked about, because that shows so much expression, communication, and socialization. We imprint on people to mimic them and follow them and see what they're doing, what they like, what's acceptable to them. Laughter and smiling is another form of communication so that we can learn to fit in, learn what is acceptable, and essentially connect with others. And this is showing how literally from the very first days of your life, you're taking other people's experiences and adopting them into who you are. And you're forming yourself based on other people.
And on mimicry, are any of you in here working a job where you can get tipped? Maybe a waitress or a server or something? So a study showed that waitresses or servers, anybody who can get tipped really, who kind of mimic the actions, behaviors of their customer tend to get tipped more. So I think, Emma, you raised your hand. Try to mimic your customers, lightly, but
you'll get more tips.
According to the book.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of the sections in the questionnaire. It says, describe who you are in these environments, home, self, or home, school, work, out at Willie's, with your friends, whatever. Who wants to share? We'll wait, it's fine.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so question 4 on here. We ask you to describe yourself at school, then at work, then at Willie's, and then alone in your room.
Or maybe even just tell us how you're different in these different environments. Maybe tell us how you feel these environments affect you.
How do we act in school right now in class?
Quiet, apparently.
Yes, quiet. Maybe a little bit more reserved, yeah. More disciplined, more respectful, maybe. We tend to be a little bit more responsible, think of ourselves more academically. Now how about at Willie's or Field House, whatever your desired social outing is? It's okay, y'all. We all do it. If you don't, pick another scenario that you know correlates. Are you gonna be less inhibition, less responsibility, right? May not be making the most sound choices that we would make in a classroom. Are we this quiet? That's what I thought. What about with your family? How would you describe yourself when you're with your family?
I can say when I'm with my family, I feel entirely different than I do when I'm around my friends. Like, my friends all know me as like this really outgoing person. Like, if there's something silly to do, Reese is gonna go do it. But my family is like, oh my gosh, she seems so mature for her age. Like, oh my gosh, Reese just shows no emotions. Like, oh my gosh, Reese, you're a robot. They bought me a robot lamp for Christmas. So this is an example, because I just feel like my family, like, from a very young age, my dad kind of like raised me, like, be calm, like, be nice. So then when I'm with my friends, I'm just kind of like the Tasmanian devil sometimes, it feels like. I'm just like ready to go. So it just feels like these two almost completely different identities of like Reese with her friends versus Reese with her family.
So which one's your true self?
Both.
Both. How is that possible? If they're complete opposites.
I think it's like your true self is how you are when you're alone.
Okay.
Because in that scenario, the only person you're trying to like approve is yourself. So you're trying to, when you're with yourself, you're trying to live up to like what your ideals, like what do you call it, your cognitive ideals like are, versus being influenced by like those around you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are still aspects that are like true of you, but your true self is probably like is less masked when you're just alone.
Did you have something?
I'm gonna completely disagree with you. Just for a second though. I don't remember the name of the book, but I read it in my honors class last year, and it talks about how being alone has no effect on yourself. Because when you're alone, you're thinking, oh, what if someone found out that I did this? Or, oh, what if my neighbor happened to look in the window across the street? Or what if, you know, and it's all these things on what if someone finds out what I'm doing? And so that's still gonna change how you react and how you're acting even when you're alone. And so I think your true self is more, it's vague. It's some core beliefs that are being constantly contradicted in everyday life because you don't have the ability to always be who you say you are, and I don't think anyone like can always act the way that they want to act.
I feel like it's like different for each person though, because maybe the self is like how you react to those thoughts. Cause like for me, I would say like myself, I am one who doesn't really change my personality from situation to situation. Like obviously it alters a little bit, but it's not like I'm not hugely influenced by it, but that's also like the person that you made yourself to be. And like when I'm alone, like I just be me, like I don't really care what people would think about it, versus like it's just person to person, you perceive yourself, like it doesn't all have to be the same. Like I perceive myself as my best self when I'm alone, versus someone who maybe like likes themselves more when they're around people would perceive that as their true self. So it like varies.
Yeah, so in both situations, you know, whether you agree if being alone or not is, you know, your most true self. Like you were saying, you might be thinking, what if someone sees me and I don't realize it, blah, blah, blah. Those both feed into the aspect of how our social life affects ourself. It is affecting it. We change in our environments, we change who we're around, we change when we think someone is watching us. But we can't deny that each of those changes is not also part of who we are, because it happens instinctively. You know, sometimes we act purposefully on that, but we don't always think about, oh, I'm going to school, I'm gonna be more responsible today, I'm gonna be a little more quiet in class, I'm gonna pay attention really well, and then I'm gonna go to Willie's and I'm gonna do the opposite and I'm gonna be really loud and exuberant. It's not something we think about, right? But at the same time, if you're alone in your room and you're in an objective situation, there's no one else with you, and I present you a scenario, whatever decision you make, most of us might think that's our decision. However, our decision and our self and who we are, our thoughts, were only created by other people from the very beginning, right? From other people, from our memories. literally from the start, each of those webs in the spider web is created from someone else or something else around us or something happening to us. So it's really questionable on whether that self is created by us, right?
I think what I hear you saying, that one of the core, I guess, percepts or constructs of social psychology is that none of us are ever truly alone. Because, think about the default mode network, right? Even when you're in your room by yourself, what's going on in your brain is often something related to your relationships with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're saying, that's probably because we don't have a self without those relationships or without those experiences that we've had with people.
Exactly.
So the textbook definition of social psychology is how our behavior is affected by the real or implied presence of other people. So
Yes.
even when nobody is physically there, we're still thinking about other folks.
Exactly.
And I think your self is like, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no.
Your like self is how you react to those thoughts. So like, if you're one to like alter your actions, yourself may be a little bit more like conformity, like going towards that. Or like if you're one to not, your true self is like true to what you care about. Or like like
those
it's more
reactions.
of how you react. Like that's
Right.
yourself.
And those reactions were formed inherently from other people from the start. Because that primed you on how you want to act, whether you're mimicking them
Whether
or
you
opposing
care
them.
to mimic them or not.
Exactly. For time-wise, we're gonna move on a little bit. So if the self isn't ours, why do we create this? Why do we have this? And why is it, something so instinct in us?
Okay, we're good. So we kind of need this sense of self, so that way we can feel like we have a sense of control. Because if you don't feel like you have any control over your thoughts, your actions, your behaviors, or your outcomes, then you're gonna feel kind of helpless. So a really good example of this, 9/11. Of course, that was in September, so you have Christmas coming up just afterwards, and there are large amounts of people traveling to New York for holiday travel. So many people decided to drive instead of fly following 9/11 that the amount of traffic accidents and traffic-related deaths skyrocketed to a point that more people died on the road than passengers that died in the plane. Not people that died overall from 9/11, but passengers in the plane. So statistically, you would have been safer in a plane than in your car driving to New York that December after 9/11. But so many people chose to drive instead. Why do they do this? Because they felt comfort in that control. If I'm driving a car, if I'm behind this wheel, I feel better. I know I like to drive my friends and I around because I like to feel like I'm in control. I know that whatever happens behind that wheel and on that road, I, for the most part, was in control. But of course, I can't control other drivers, and that makes me feel good.
And that's actually a very core fact in psychology. It's called internal locus of control and external locus of control. Internal is when you believe wholeheartedly that you have this, you have control over the things that happen to you, at least, mostly, and you decide, your fate, essentially. Whereas an external locus of control is where everything happens to me. These things are happening to me because of other ideals, and that kind of goes into learned helplessness if we go back to, Skinner conditioning and all of that. But if we have this external locus of control and we don't believe that we have control of something, you are more likely to be depressed, to be anxious, and risk lots and lots of essentially low self-esteem in general. And it really contributes to your life, just this simple belief of control.
And if you have any crazy superstitions, or just for any superstitions that exist, that's kind of why we have them. They make us feel in control, like, with salt, throwing it over your shoulder makes you feel in control, even though scientifically throwing salt over your shoulder probably has no impact on any outcomes.
Probably.
Well,
No,
depending on who
sure.
you ask.
Yeah.
Why would you throw salt over your shoulder?
It's just a superstition for good living.
It's something like if you spill salt, you need to throw it over your shoulder, or some monsters.
Or don't walk under a ladder. Well,
Yeah.
that one's probably for real safety, but you see a black cat, do whatever. Don't step on the crack, all that jazz.
Okay, so here's an example of like, do we really have control of our actions? So let's think again about how much other people influence our actions. So in one study that was done, like students or a student was placed in a room, either with like other people or alone. So 71% of students who were in this room all alone, being observed by a camera, but you know, all alone, cheated on an exam they were taking. Everybody close your eyes, including you, Dr. Bartholow.
Mhm.
Now, raise your hand if you've ever cheated on an exam. Okay, so we have overwhelming majority of hands up. Why did we do that? Well, probably because we thought we could get away with it. And in this experiment, 71% of students who were in a situation where they're like, yeah, I can get away with this. Nobody's gonna see me do this. They didn't. Now, in an alternate scenario, they put a mirror in front of them. Nobody else in the room still, just a mirror in front of them. Only 7% of students cheated on the exam. So what did the mirror have to do with it? Well, it just kind of opened you up to like this self-reflection and almost like taking on the perception of another person watching you cheat. And so then only 7% of students cheat on the exam because they still felt like in some way they were being watched or their actions were on the table to be criticized.
Right, so just like how we had quite a few of us raise our hands when we had our eyes closed, if our eyes were open, would we have had that many hands up? Probably not.
Probably would have been awkward looks around the room like,
Exactly, right.
So do you think like a lot of like morals and values only come about because we think other people are watching rather than them being like intrinsic? Because like to me, like I don't cheat because I think that's wrong.
Right,
Whereas
so
like it doesn't matter whether or not I perceive other people of like what they think.
yeah, so part of that is because, you know, maybe other people are watching. If you're really struggling and someone wasn't watching, maybe you just might be like, eh. But that intrinsic motivation not to do that and to, you know, genuinely learn and apply yourself comes from how you've grown up, which comes from the people around you and your memories and experiences, which goes back to that innate need as a baby to socialize, and that is what's creating our brain. And so that inherently creates who you are, which has brought us to here. Does that make sense? It's a lot, and it's very abstract. Essentially, well, let's look at this first. So these are all things that contribute to our actions, right? The plasticity, our neurons, our anatomical changes contributes to who we are in our actions. A different environment that we're in, a different social setting. In groups and out groups, we talked about it in class. You know, if we tell you the people with blue eyes are smarter, you're gonna act smarter and you're gonna do better because you believe in yourself more. De-individuation, all of those examples where you're not acting outside of yourself, that's not us controlling our actions. And so essentially, others influence us for both the good and the bad. And these social factors have so much of a play into what our self is, right?
so there's another quote in the book I really liked. It says, our actions are a product of excitation and inhibition in the brain. And we know that our brain is structured from a very young age through our experiences and our interactions with other people and our environment.
Okay, so again, this is that square that we saw in the beginning. In this example, it's a circle. It's not there, but rather molded by the things that are around it, the things we've experienced, the people around us. From childhood, from day one, you are primed and created essentially from the people around you. Then you go to work and family, and the people around you are affecting you. And the environment you're in at work is affecting you and building onto who you are and to that self. Your hobbies, your experiences, all of that is forming who you are. None of it comes from you, right? So, essentially, the book describes that the reason we have a self is to give us that ability to be in control, that perception that we're in control, that perception that, you know, we are someone in the world, we have a purpose, we have a distinct identity of who we think we are. And when you don't have that ideal and that understanding, again, it leads to lack of self-esteem, lack of motivation, lack of purpose. So sorry, the book apologizes for exposing us all to this, but is essentially the purpose of the book, he's saying, is to be aware of all these other influences that affect us, affect our thoughts and actions, and to consider that whenever we're moving forward.
So this isn't just on here for giggles. So another study that was presented in the book, they like kind of took people and just kind of asked them like, to what extent do you feel like you have control over your life? Just like control of your outcomes, whatever. Are you in control of the self you have? And for the people who are like, no, like my life's kind of predetermined, blah, 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 like I don't have a lot of control over my outcomes, what's gonna happen is gonna happen. They showed to have like less career success and just overall like more feelings of hopelessness. While people were like, yeah, I have control over my outcomes. Like if I like keep pushing to be successful, I'm gonna be successful. They were shown in real life to have better career outcomes. So even though this book kind of calls into question like, do you really have a self? Or like, is your self like a product of your own creation? Well, no, it's more a product of your experiences and the people around you. Still believe in yourself.
Just ignore what
Still
we said.
believe in yourself
Take it with a grain of
because
salt.
that's going to be very crucial to just like your mental well-being and just like if I can do it, I'm going to do it. I can do it. Like I have control over my life.
So that's what we've got. Thoughts, discussion, questions.
I kind of disagree with you, but I was gonna say, like, what do you think about like kids? Like, you can have two kids who like grow up with like going through a divorce or like abusive parents, and like they come out of it differently. Like, one continues those behaviors like with their kids, and one like flips their whole life around. Yet, like, they had the same kind of upbringing, the same traumas and stuff. Like, I feel like we do have a control. Like, again, back to the reactions of how we react to those things, and like that's what determines our fate.
But
So
why do
it's-
we react in a certain way?
Yeah, so I think like that's probably like it could be influenced by other things, but it could also, I think everyone has like an innate like set of not like feelings, but just like desires or passions. Like it may not be in one's nature to like fight for a better life and like go want more for themselves to get a corporate job or like to go to a university if they grew up in like a poor household, like a abusive household. They may just like throw their hands up. That may just be like innate in them versus a kid who like grew up with the same role models in the same neighborhood and like just chooses for themselves like that they want something better.
Yeah, so let's, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say on that, because I definitely like see what you're saying and I agree, like, you know, if you grew up in the same environment, then why not have the same outcomes? But when you look at it like on a smaller level, even like two twins who grew up in like the same household with the same parents in the same neighborhood and go to the same school, their environments aren't going to be exactly identical to each other because of maybe who you interact with at school or how this teacher treats you and this class you take and this club you join or this sports team you're a part of. And that comes back to that image on the last screen where it has like the circle of you and all the things around. So even that, though, like that family thing might be the same, and like the neighborhood might be the same, and even the school might be the same, there might be stuff within it that's different.
Yeah, and I think like one of the kids, like taking the scenario I gave, could have seen like a corporate man walk past and how good of life he had, and like that's what motivated him to do it. But the other kid could have also seen that and just like